The year is 1954. Some of the last gasps of Golden Age superheroes are appearing, and it is pre-code horror that is ruling the roost. Let's take a look at the books that made the CGC's top 10 for most submitted comic books from 1953. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. And before we get started, like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description for links to my eBay store, my email, my whatnot, and my Instagram. You know what to do. We've been doing this list for about the last 19 weeks, where we look at the books, according to CGCdata.com, that have the most copies on the census for each year. We count down the top 10, then we also look at some other significant books, including first appearances. We're going to look at some last appearances in this list, as well as books that are the top from each publisher, and also notable books, essentially books that are of high value. Don't really talk about the prices. That's not what this is about. This is books that get submitted, but books that have higher value are going to be more likely to be submitted. So this is 1953. We only look at blue labels. I don't include restored or conserved or qualified books. And at this point in time, that's a smaller percentage of the overall number of books that are submitted to CGC. And for years, DC's been kind of dominating. Not anymore. 1953, superheroes are fading away. DC superheroes are just holding on. And let's take a look at the books that made the top 10 list. So at number 10, from EC Comics, is Haunt of Fear, number 19. This is a Graham Ingalls cover, and it is a beheading cover, which is popular amongst collectors. And it's really 1953 where the pre-code horror really starts to get more and more horrific. You have this executioner with the double-headed axe about to chop two people's heads off at the same time, so quite efficient. This was also a book that was used in SOTY. You'll see that as a designation on CGC labels. That refers to the 1954 book by Frederick Wortham, Seduction of the Innocent, where he claimed that comic books were leading to juvenile delinquency, which there were congressional hearings and book burnings, which eventually led to the establishment of the Comics Code Authority a couple of years later. So this particular book comes in at number 10 with a census count of 178. Number 9 on the list is also an EC book. It's still a comic book at this time, and that is Mad, number 3, which has a Harvey Kurtzman cover. Mad was by EC, and it was one of the first of each publisher kind of picked up on this. A lot of different publishers of these horror parodies. Mad Magazine has continued to this day, was really a cultural touchstone. This particular book, number 3, it parodies movies and TV shows of the time. And you can see in the notes it says Dragnet and Lone Ranger parodies. Mad number 3 has 193 copies on the census. So coming in at number 8 on the list is from EC Comics, Haunt of Fear number 17, with this cover by Graham Ingalls, which has these kind of zombie characters on the cover. Again, we are seeing more and more horrific and gruesome covers in 1953 as opposed to 51, 50, 52. The artists, cover artists especially, are kind of pushing the boundaries of what they could do. And so we have this particular book that comes in at number 8. And you do have to be careful because most of these EC titles kind of restarted their numbering. So there are 2 number 17s. There's a number 17 from 1950, which is really number 3, and then this one from 1953. Let us go to number 7 on the list. And we take a little bit of a respite from the horror, and we go to 4-color number 456. Uncle Scrooge Back to the Klondike, a Carl Barks cover and story. And we've talked, this is the first appearance of Glittering Goldie, But we talked in the past about how Karl Barks is a very popular artist among Disney aficionados and comic book collectors. So you kind of had that cross section. These books were printed in high quantities. Probably at this point in time, they had the highest print runs, the Dell Disney books, of any comic books at the time in 1953. So enough of them have survived to the present day and in nice condition. And for this particular book, at number 7, there are 197 copies on the census. Go to number 6 on the list, and it is Mad number 5. Still not Mad Magazine, still comic book sized. And it's a Bill Elder cover with the kind of femme fatale here on the cover. There are also a lot of horror elements about this private eye, and there's a Black Hawk parody in here as well. So you say you lost your voice and want me to find it. At last, an exciting case. So he has a lot of crazy stuff going on around him, but the beautiful woman is what is making his case quite exciting. Yeah, there's a lot going on this cover. And, you know, Mad Magazine, as I said, very important part of popular culture of the 20th century. At number 5 on the list is Crime Suspense Stories number 17, with this well-known Johnny Craig cover of this dude getting shot in the head. Again, we talked about more gruesome covers. This is one of them. This is more crime-related than horror-related. You know, it doesn't have kind of, you know, monsters and zombies and that sort of thing. But yeah, this guy committing suicide in front of the woman, and you can actually see the back of it reflected in the mirror. And in this issue, EC's adaptation of a story by Ray Bradbury. So Crime Suspense Stories number 17 has 225 copies on the census. Coming in 4th place is Mad number 4. Same female character we saw in the previous issue. Superman, Robin Hood, and the Shadow parodies. This is a Harvey Kurtzman cover. Kill me, don't be absurd. What makes you think anyone wants to kill me? There's dynamite in a booby trap with a bomb and cannons and snakes and guns and knives. So again, a horror parody. Mad number 4. This is actually, of the books in the top 10, has the highest average grade on the census, which is 6.15, and it has a total of 235 copies. Number 3 on the list is EC Comics Tales from the Crypt number 33, with another gruesome cover by Jack Davis. So you have kind of a mummy that's pretty well rotting away, and these Enoch, these kind of conjoined twins that are coming out of this vat. Just, yeah, a crazy cover. And this particular book has a census count of 249. Second on the list is this second issue of Mad. This particular book has a Jack Davis cover of this baseball player who thinks that someone is giving him an evil eye, and it appears there is an eye that looks quite evil on the cover. Very busy cover. It does have a Tarzan of the Apes parody, and this particular book has a census count of 271. Now, this list is for comic books, the top 10 comic books on the CGC census. But CGC also, they do grade pulp magazines, and that was important in the 1930s for looking at the census count, and other magazines. So magazines that are not just comic book magazines. So we kind of have to go to an asterisk, a book that kind of falls between 1 and 2 in the count. But if we count it overall, it would have second on the census count, and that is Playboy. First issue of Playboy, number 1. From HMH Publishing Company, Hugh M. Hefner, I suppose. And it is this Marilyn Monroe cover. You probably can figure out what's on the inside. It does say it, first time in any magazine, full color, the famous Marilyn Monroe nude. So, there are collectors of Playboy. The problem is when you slab it, you can't read the articles. And nor can you see Marilyn Monroe other than on the cover. But this particular book, it does have the lowest of any books on the top 10, the lowest average grade is just 5.01, which isn't that low compared to other books. But its census count of blue labels is 320. And now we have to talk about the top book on the list, which does outpace Playboy in terms of the number of blue labels. And we go back to EC Comics. It is Shock Suspense Stories number 6. This cover by Wally Wood. Another classic, basically guy in a red hood kind of cover. Woman tied up in some sheer clothing. Great cover by Wally Wood. Pre-Code Horror. This has more... It isn't as horrific. The horror of this is implied as the guy, with the foreground with the whip is there with a... with the hood is there with a whip as the woman is tied up. So kind of a crazy cover. And this has the top most submitted book from 1953 for comic books with a total of 337 copies in the census. Now, what about other books? We go past the top 10. We go to top publishers and other important comics in terms of, their collectability and their value. And let's stay with EC at number 13. And it's Crime Suspense Stories number 19. This is a Al Feldstein cover where this woman is being held underwater and choked and drowning. And again, we talk about horrific. This is horrific. It's more, again, crime horror as opposed to monster horror. But this is these kinds of covers are the ones that EC collectors go after and tend to be very popular. So this particular book does have a census count of 166. From Eastern Color, Famous Funnies. Famous Funnies has been towards the bottom of our list. That's the top book from Eastern Color every year, where it's been mostly like humor books. But in this case, Famous Funnies number 209 is up there because it has a Frank Frazetta cover. He did several covers. This is a Buck Rogers cover over the next year. And they are highly collectible. Frazetta, very popular amongst collectors, one of the classic artists of the Golden Age. And you see, you got the aliens, the ray gun, the damsel in distress. The only thing that's missing is Buck is not wearing a bubble helmet. But a departure for the Famous Funnies line. They did have a science fiction book in 1952. But prior to that, for the most part, it was just, silly humor books, which aren't really highly sought after by collectors, but Frazetta covers definitely are. And this is the top book from Eastern Color with issue number 209. This has a census count of 162. Up next, the top DC book, coming in at just 23rd place. DC had dominated the list for years, and now really falling down. It's Batman number 79, a Win Mortimer cover featuring Vicky Vale, the Bride of Batman. Not really. And this is the top DC book. DC, is down to basically, at this point in time, Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, and their related titles like Action, Adventure, Detective, and Superboy. And for superheroes, that's it. They do have other properties, but the superheroes that survived from the Golden Age, that's it. And we have 3 more years before DC comes back in full force in the Silver Age with superheroes. So Batman is the most collectible of those, and this particular book has 141 copies on the census. Well, Atlas, also tied with it, is a classic cover. The top book from Harvey is Chamber of Chills number 19, this Lee Elias cover, where you have the woman and the guy with the skeleton hand is looking through the glass of liquor and wishing her a happy anniversary and seeing, like her skull in the x-ray. That's kind of gruesome. And this is a classic pre-code horror book. I'd say one of the more recognizable covers, especially non-EC books. And this, like the Batman, has a census count of 141. The top book from Atlas. Here it is. It's Young Men number 24 which is the reintroduction of their superheroes, Human Torch, Submariner, Captain America. And what really is interesting is it's Human Torch who gets the top billing. He gets the main focus of the cover. This would last for a little less than a year, this attempt to reinvigorate the superheroes. There was an attempt to reinvigorate superheroes because this was around the time that Adventures of Superman TV series was out in syndication. There was talk of potentially a Submariner TV series that never came to fruition. So Atlas tried the superheroes again, but the horror books, I think, were just overwhelming the newsstands at the time. And this lands at 41st on the list, top Atlas book, with a census count of 112. Our next book, which is also from Harvey, and I put this on the list because it has an average grade on the census of 8.92. There must have been a warehouse find of these. This is True 3D number 1. Which was manufactured with 2 pairs of 3D glasses. Now, in order to get a blue label on something like this, you need to have those 3D glasses. If they're stapled into the book, and I'm not totally familiar with this book, if they're stapled into the book, they need to be there. 3D in movies and in comic books was quite the rage at this point in time. And this book, again, has a lot of books graded in the 9s. And again, I'm not sure where they all came from, but it does have a census count of 110. The top book from Aragon Publications, this Bernard Bailey cover of Mr. Mystery number 12, which has this, what's denoted, and it's been denoted in Overstreet for years, a classic injury to eye cover, right? You have this hot poker that's approaching this poor dude's eye. There's a decapitation panel. This, again, a well-known cover of the Golden Age. It's the top book from Aragon, and there's 72 copies on the census. Top book from Fiction House. And Fiction House, this was like the last gasps of Fiction House. It's Planet Comics number 71 with a Maurice Whitman cover. That's a really good cover, I think. So you have this woman, fighting these aliens, and it contains an atomic explosion panel. But Planet Comics, basically most of the Fiction House comics, Jumbo and Jungle, I think their last issues were here in 1953. This is the top submitted book from Fiction House for 1953. So we're going to say goodbye to Fiction House. 71 copies on the census, or I'm sorry, 93 copies on the census. Up next from Charlton, their top book, and it is Lawbreakers Suspense Stories number 11. It is a Lou Morales cover, and this is, again, another classic. This is a crime creepy one, but it's really creepy, and it's easy to understand why the Comics Code Authority came into existence around this time, because this stuff was just like off the chain. So you have this guy, this woman is scared to death. He says, "I know you are a mute, Miss Kimberly, but even if you could yell, the people downstairs couldn't call the police. You see, I already cut all their tongues out." And he's holding a whole stack of tongues, and they're falling to the ground. Just insane stuff, right? And that's what makes it collectible among collectors. It's also a great cover. The composition is awesome, and for the horror genre, top Charlton book with a total of 87 copies on the census. Our top Gilmore comic is Weird Mysteries number 5, also a Bernard Bailey cover of basically this brain. I'm not sure if the brain's being put into the skull or taken out. It's unclear. It looks like it's taken out because that guy looks like he's seen better days. Or maybe they just have a skull there. I don't know. But anyway, Bailey actually created Our Man and the Spectre in the Golden Age for DC, and he was doing horror here for some of the other non-EC publishers, some of the smaller publishers, and his covers can be quite collectible, especially depending on the subject matter. So this book, Weird Mysteries number 5, has a census count of 81. The top book from Avon is Witchcraft 5, a painted cover by Kelly Frias. You have this monster, a pile of of skeletons, a woman in a small red dress trying to flee. This particular book has 78 copies on the Census, and it does have those horror elements, right? We're seeing, especially the books that are collected now, right? You know, they're listen, the Disney books were being highly published. I'm sure Superman, probably in print count Superman, and maybe Batman could have approached some of the EC books, but what collectors are going after is the pre-code horror. Take a little bit of a break from that. The top book from Standard Comics is Dennis the Menace #1, which is the first comic book appearance of Dennis. And this would last for a long time. I'm not exactly sure how many issues of Dennis the Menace there were, but he lasted into the 1970s, a TV show, a movie in the 90s, a very big character in pop culture, and this has a census count of 76. Story Comics, their top book is Mysterious Adventures 13, Dick Beck cover, and what do you want in a pre-code horror cover? You want a skull. And this has a flaming skull, and this woman's trying to pull the guy out of the skull. The skull's mouth doesn't look like it's working too well. And so, yeah, skull covers are going to sell. They're collectors. They love their skull covers. And this book from Story has a census count of 74. From another big book from Atlas, this is one of their horror books. It has a Bill Everett cover, who is the creator of Submariner, did a lot of work for Marvel through the Silver and into the Bronze Age. It's the first appearance of the zombie. Not a big deal. But I think this zombie rising out of the sidewalk. This does have a census count of 72. So I think also people gravitate, some collectors, towards the Atlas pre-code horror because Atlas is the precursor to Marvel. So they do have that connection that other publishers don't. And DC wasn't doing this kind of horror at the time. Next on our list is Weird Tales of the Future #8, another Bernard Bailey cover where this guy is looking at, I guess, his own heart that's been pulled out of his body. And this is the last issue of the series. Again, the Bailey covers we talked about. I think his coloring is somewhat similar to L.B. Cole's, a lot of use of primary colors and use of colors in the shading. So this Weird Tales of the Future has a census count of 71. From Fiction House, a horror book. This is Ghost Comics #6, covered by Maurice Whitman. You have the woman in the red dress in bondage, the monster over her with the chains, and then the guy in the background about to save her. And there's also spider's web, and there's some sort of face in the background. A lot of going on in this cover. Very emblematic of pre-code horror of this era. Again, a little more horrific than 51 and 52 in general. But Maurice Whitman did some great covers. Really, really well rendered. This book has a census count of 70. Top book from Toby Press is Tales of Horror #8. This has a Mel Kiefer cover where you have this giant snake wrapped around a skyscraper. I'm not sure what else to tell you about Tales of Horror #8. You can see it. It's also a nice red cover that will stand out. This has a census count of 70. The top book from Star Publications, an L.B. Cole cover, Terrifying Tales #13. And what I think it has going for it is it has this devil character front and center. A mad scheme for conquest in the frightening depths of the jungle. The warped creation of a maniac, intention destroying all who stood in his path. It was into this terrifying maelstrom that the peaceful natives found themselves thrust. All seemed lost when the devil in human guise decided to slay the beautiful ruler of the jungle in the Deathfire. Black magic, voodoo, jungle mystery. Jungle comics were quite popular. Jungle-themed comics, coming out of Tarzan and Sheena and so on. A lot of Fiction House stuff, but this is from Star Publications, an L.B. Cole cover. Just very strong use of primary colors on the cover. And this particular book has a census count of 69. Top book from Comic Media, Horrific 3. This dude has a bullet in his head. Don Heck cover. And this is kind of the expression I had on my face when I saw that Don Heck took the Justice League art tours over from George Perez years later. As a classic bullet in the head cover in quotation marks. Yeah, that guy's not doing well. Again, horrific, more horrific. It seems like the publishers are trying to one-up each other with the content and how outrageous they can get and what they put on their covers. This 66 copies on the Census. Non-horror. The top book from Archie is Archie's Pals and Gals #1 with a Bill Vigoda cover. You have both his pals, Reggie and Jughead, and his gals, Betty and Veronica, all on the cover. This is an extra thick book, 116 pages of new stories. And again, it's top book from Archie. The ones that'll pop from Archie at this point in time are kind of the innuendo covers. This is not one of those. It's just a #1, and it has a census count of 64. Another Aragon book. This is Weird Tales of the Future #5, with a cover by Basil Wolverton. More of a science fiction / horror. They kind of tried to take the science fiction in a horror route, being Weird Tales from the Future. We have this kind of bizarre-looking alien as this woman wakes up and looks out the porthole of her spaceship. Census count of 63 for this book. This is an interesting one from Avon. It's not their top book of the year, but it's interesting. It adapts the Bram Stoker novel, and it's the first appearance of Dracula in comic books. That's what makes it a key. It's Eerie #12. I think this would be a popular cover among Mark Spears collectors with the Dracula image there. So the first appearance of Dracula, some 19 years before Tomb of Dracula 1, is here in Eerie #12, which it has a census count of 63. The top book from United Feature Syndicate, Peanuts #1 by Charles Schultz. It doesn't credit Charles Schultz I have to imagine Schultz did this cover. It's the only issue of just Peanuts. I think there was another different Peanuts book, but we have, Charlie Brown is the catcher here, and Snoopy, Mach 1, Snoopy looking on. I talked about how big a part of popular culture in the 20th century Mad Magazine was. Peanuts was much bigger than that. Still has maintained to this day, but Charles Schultz did that daily newspaper strip for about 60 years, starting in right around 1950. Peanuts gang in here. And I also like the look of this cover. It's very of its time, like that 1950s post-war suburban kind of look with the fireplace there and everything. So, yeah, a fun book at 61 copies on the Census. This is the top book from Ace Periodicals. It is World War III #1. And it says, the war that will never happen if America remains strong and alert. But here we see, the Capitol building being blown up, and there were a lot of these anti-communist propaganda films. Remember, this is like the age of McCarthyism, the height of the Cold War. The Cold War is really ramping up in the early 1950s, and the dangers of communism were, I'm sure, what this book is about. And it has a census count of 60. Top book from Farrell is Haunted Thrills #5, classic skull cover. Again, skeletons crawling out of this skull. That sells 59 copies on the Census. That ties it with Weird Mysteries #4. Trying to find that. Weird Mysteries #4 from Gilmore Magazines. This is another Bernard Bailey cover, and you have a skull cover and this kind of insect human hybrid creature crawling out of the mouth of the skeleton. Classic skull cover, and also 59 copies on the Census. That ties it with the top book from St. John's Publications, Three Stooges #1, comedy book. This does a Norman Maurer cover, and it does include Joe Kubert art. So Shemp is the third Stooge at this point in time. And yeah, just #1 issue from a very well-known comedy team. They did comic books, of course, movies, shorts, and TV, and they had a cartoon and all sorts of stuff. So this also has 59 copies on the Census, and that ties it with the top book from Youthful Magazines, which is Chilling Tales #17, a Matt Fox cover. And it seems as though a lot of people are kind of gravitating towards this L.B. Cole style, with primary colors, using a color as shading in the skulls and the faces. That's what I'm seeing here. This particular book also with 59 copies on the Census. The top book from Trojan. And you're going to see a lot of similarities here. This is Beware #6, with this skeleton coming out of the tomb. It's Tim. He won't stay buried. I told you we'd never get away with murder. So a combination of crime and horror. Got a skeleton on the cover. This was used in Seduction of the Innocent. 58 copies on the Census. Chilling Tales #16. This does have a bondage cover by Henry Kiefer. This woman is being thrown into this flaming vat of skeletons. Doesn't look like it's going to work out too well for her by these guys. I don't know if they have masks on or they actually just have skeleton faces. But skeletons, bondage, it's all going to come together and be sought after by collectors. And this has a census count of 57. This one is interesting. It's the top book from Quality Comics. Quality Comics was nearing their end, and they were kind of branching out, as most publishers were, into horror. This cover by Jack Cole, the creator of Plastic Man. And this is Web of Evil #5, this classic electrocution panel. Don't miss The Man Who Died Twice. He seems to be having a lot of fun. He's laughing, and the guards here who are electrocuting him seem to be the ones in trouble. Again, a Jack Cole cover. Quality Comics wouldn't completely go away. I think it was in 1956 they were bought out by DC, so they have a few more years going on. And they did have some properties that did hold on. Web of Evil didn't transfer over, but this has a census count of 56. Speaking of publishers that got bought out by DC, Fawcett Comics. The publisher of Captain Marvel. Bill Wolfwick story. This is the last issue of Underworld Crime, issue #7. And again, the hot poker, the woman tied up. The guy in the back was also tied up, and these thugs about to torture her. Again, horrific crime elements in this. And it's kind of the anticipation of the horror here. And yeah, this particular book has a census count of 55, which ties it for the top Fawcett book with This Magazine is Haunted. #14, this is the last Fawcett issue, because Fawcett was on their last legs. This was the last year of Fawcett before they kind of gave up the ghost, as we'll talk about a little bit later on this list. Charlton would pick up this particular book with issue #15, and they would publish a total of 7 issues into the next year. So that was the history of This Magazine is Haunted. So both of these Fawcett books have a census count of 55. And This Magazine is Haunted, again, this Dr. Death is kind of the narrator of the stories therein. Another classic Atlas book with a Bill Everett cover. This is Journey into Mystery #6. 77 issues later, it would have the first appearance of Thor. But this particular book does have this marriage to a skeleton. Skeleton skulls, they're going to sell till death do us part. And, Stan Lee wrote stories in this, and there's also art by Russ Heath, amongst others. This has a census count of 54. The top book from Superior Comics is Strange Mysteries #10. This was a book that was used in Seduction of the Innocent. We can see here on the cover, you got a skeleton there, you got other monsters, you got a spider's web, you got a woman running away with the skeletal hand clutching her leg. That's got enough for pre-code horror. This particular book has a census count of 50. From Harvey. This is a first appearance in a #1 issue, but it's not a first appearance of Little Dot in Little Dot #1, but it is the first appearance of Richie Rich, and also the first appearance of Little Lotta. Richie Rich was one of the top-selling books in the 1960s, and this is where he got a start in Little Dot #1. Little Dot is the little girl who loves dots. You can see she's painting her doghouse polka dots. Somehow she has paint that paints polka dots. I don't know how that happens, but her dog seems really happy with the paint job on his doghouse. Again, Richie Rich TV shows, movie with Macaulay Culkin in the 90s. Yeah, you don't have to bother. Animated series. I mean, he had numerous comics in the 60s into the 70s. So this particular book, census count of 48. The top book from Master Publications. It does have a very EC look to it. It's Dark Mysteries #10 with a High Fleischman cover. There's a cannibalism story. There's a witch burning bondage cover. And we can see 2 witches are already aflame. And this third witch who's tied up to the stake is about to get it from this guy who looks like he's a zombie of some sorts. He's kind of rotting away. Yeah. They went in hard, Dark Mysteries #10 on this cover. There are 45 copies on the census. From Story Comics is Mysterious Adventures 15 with this classic skull cover where I guess this woman's significant other, Bill, this guy is using Bill's skull as a bowling ball. Seems like he's successful. He's knocked down at least a couple pins with a skull. I would think it would be having trouble rolling it down the alley, really. But I guess maybe he's an expert in such things. So this is a Dick Beck cover, and it has a census count of 44. Top book from Prize Publications, and Prize is really feature book. They did have some romance books at the time. I forget which one. The one, I think, was it Young Love? That got absorbed by DC later on. It's Frankenstein #26 by Dick Briefer. He was the Frankenstein artist throughout the run. Originally, it was more comedic, but here it's more into horror, but not as horrific as some of the other books that we've seen in this pre-code horror era. This has a census count of 44. For Magazine Enterprises, their top book is Manhunt at #14, which is Dick Ayers and Ernie Bacci cover. Again, this tiny little guy using a syringe to inject something into this woman's neck. It's a bondage hypodermic needle cover. And you have the guy in the trench coat coming in to save her, but it might be too late. Even though it seems to be a crime comic, definitely horror element on this cover. 41 copies on the census. Another book from Fawcett. This is Captain Marvel Jr. #119, and it is the final issue of Captain Marvel Jr. Mid-1953, Fawcett was shutting down after being sued by DC. Sadly, final issue of the run. Of course, DC did later acquire these characters, and Captain Marvel Jr. is still used to this day, although not with that name, obviously. 40 copies on the census. The top book from Ajax Farrell is Strange Fantasy #5. You got the skull, the tiny woman in the red dress being stabbed by the witch. Just kind of, your standard crazy pre-code horror stuff. This has 39 copies on the census, which ties it with the top book from Orbit, which is Wanted #52, which has a John Buscema cover. Of course, later a classic artist with Marvel Comics for decades. Classic opium use story. There's a hanging panel. This is more crime-related than specifically horror, but, still this woman being, as she's waiting for the bus, I guess, being, at the very least, mugged by this guy. This also has a census count of 39. Fawcett, Captain Marvel Adventures #150. This was a few months after Captain Marvel Jr. This is the last issue, a C.C. Beck cover, Captain Marvel's Wedding. It would be 20 years before we'd see Captain Marvel again in Shazam #1. End of an era, right? It was the top-selling comic magazine in the mid-40s, but DC had sued for trademark infringement on Superman, which worked early in the 40s on a lot of Other superhero characters from other publishers, Fawcett fought back, but finally, after 13 years, they decided to just give up publishing Captain Marvel, and this is the last issue. And it has a census count of 35. Up next is Startling Terror Tales number 5. This is a classic L.B. Cole cover, and you can see his bold use of primary colors is evident here. L.B. Cole, we're not seeing much from Alex Schomburg anymore, nor from Matt Baker. And L.B. Cole is continuing on with these pre-code horror books. This particular book has a census count of 34. The final issue of Whiz Comics. Again, this is the same month as Captain Marvel Jr., 5 months before Captain Marvel Adventures. Whiz Comics 155. A CC Beck cover. And it's the second appearance of Dr. Death, who was, as I noted earlier, he was kind of the narrator of This Magazine is Haunted. Captain Marvel sharing the cover of Battling this Octopus, but you have a war story being highlighted, a horror story being highlighted. The other thing that's interesting, Captain Marvel battles the Legend Horror plus Ibis and Lance O'Casey. Those dudes survived for all 155 issues of Whiz Comics. They were in issue number 1 and made it the whole way through. This final issue of Whiz Comics has 27 copies on the census. From American Comics Group, their top book is Out of the Night 6 with a Ken Bald cover. There's a skeleton on the cover. What can I tell you? This woman is... her face is half a skull at this point in time. American Comics Group did have a number of properties through into the 1960s, and this is their top book from 1953 that has a census count of 26. This is an interesting one, a hard book to find, very expensive. It is a giant 100-pager, which was 25 cents at the time. This is Secret Diary of Eerie Adventures, no number. It's a skeleton cover by H.C. Hollingsworth. It does contain Joe Kubert art, and it's a fairly hard book to find. There are just 24 copies on the census. The top book from, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, if it's Ribbage or Ribage Publishing Corporation. This is a Myron Fass cover of a werewolf and a vampirus. Crime Mysteries number 10. Again, more into the monster part of pre-code horror. Hey, folks, this is a stick-up. Watch that punk's face when we turn around. He doesn't realize that he's mugging a werewolf and a vampire. So this is the top book from Ribbage. The 24 copies on the census. We spoke of L.B. Cole. This is a L.B. Cole romance cover. In Popular Teenagers, number 15 from Star Publications. These two folks in the car in the snow. Just you and I, honey, all our lives. Oh, darling, I've been waiting for you to kiss me for so long. My subdued longing for a little happiness suddenly gave way, and I was in his arms. I was starved for love. Usually this would be something you see more from Matt Baker, but L.B. Cole, and it's a departure from him. It's not just primary colors. It's, I think, a more detailed drawing, a more realistic drawing. But, a classic L.B. Cole cover, and this has a census count of 18. The top book from MS Publications is Famous Crimes. It seems like this woman has poisoned this guy. The cop is showing up. She has some jewelry that she's trying to hide or something. This particular comic has a census count of 18. The top book from Lev Gleason. Lev Gleason's still holding on. This is Lover's Lane number 35 with a Fred Kidda cover. No, Cliff, Bruce will kill you. The devil with Bruce, you belong to me. So it looks like a couple of lumberjacks fighting over this girl. He's pulling the back of her hair. A little bit of a headlights cover going on. So Lover's Lane number 35 from Lev Gleason has a census count of 13. Top book from Cross Publications is Perfect Crime number 31. True Facts, How Police Smash the Perfect Crime. Come on, baby. Let's drink to the new number setup. Now that we've rubbed out Louis, the profits are all ours. Kind of cool that, I guess that's not him. That's somebody else with the gun behind him. Really interesting cover. It's not credited to anyone here. This particular book from Cross has a census count of 11. Top book from Hillman Periodicals with Ernest Schroeder cover is Airboy Comics Volume 9, number 12, a great Heap cover. The Heap, the original Swamp Monster, well predated both Man-Thing and Swamp Thing. But this one, top from Hillman, just 9 copies on the census. We're going to go to the final issue of Airboy. This is Airboy Volume 10, number 4. Again, the last issue of the run. 5 copies in the census. I couldn't even find a CGC graded picture. Also has a Heap story. So Airboy, after what, 12 or 13 years, gonna call it a day. Final issue of Airboy. Similarly, Quality Comics, final issue of Police Comics. Now this is morphed into a cop book, a crime book. It was the first appearance of Plastic Man, amongst others, back in issue number 1. But the final issue of Police Comics, after like 13 years, this also has 5 copies on the census. Speaking of Quality Comics and final issues, this is the last issue of Dollman. Another hero that held on all the way till 1953. His last gasp from Quality Comics is issue number 47. Just a census count of 4 for the final issue of Dollman. Dollman would return in 1973 as a member of the Freedom Fighters in Justice League 107. And again, these characters were bought by DC. Dollman was featured in, I think, the season 3 of Harley Quinn. So there you go. That's going to be it. That's all the books from 1953, the top books on the CGC census. We're in the pre-code horror era. It's going to be a short-lived era, right? We only have 2 more years of Golden Age. Well, 56 is kind of split. But by 56, the comics landscape has completely changed from 1953. I'd like to thank you for stopping by. Let me know what you think of these books. Do you have any in your collection? Leave a comment below. That's appreciated. In the meantime, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.